Gloria Ladson-Billings is the Kellner Family Endowed Professor in Urban Education and faculty affiliate in the Departments of Educational Policy Studies and Afro American Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And she's written several books, one of which Johnny just held up a second ago, called The Dreamkeepers, Successful Teachers of African American Children. Another one is called Crossing Over to Canaan, The Journey of New Teachers in Diverse Classrooms. And then finally, Beyond the Big House, African American Educators on Teacher Education. Three titles that immediately jump out, I think, to all of us, and clearly she's going to have plenty to share with us that we're going to be interested in. Ms. Ladson-Billings is also the editor of 5 other books and author of more than 100 journal articles and book chapters. She's the former editor of the American Educational Research Journal and has served on several editorial boards and flew in from Madison just to be with us. And I'm pretty sure that's not a direct flight, so I'm all the more appreciative. So without further ado, Gloria Ladson-Billings.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction, Mr. Smythe. I'm delighted to be here. Nobody told me that it was going to be colder in Baltimore than it was in Madison, Wisconsin. It's 70 degrees in Madison, y'all. But I'm always happy to come to Baltimore. Baltimore is a place of my formative years. I'm a proud alum, lifetime, dues paying, donor at Morgan State University. And just have incredibly fond memories of having been here in Baltimore. As a native Philadelphian, Baltimore was like just a smaller size of what I was used to. So I'm actually glad to be here. I'm also glad to be here on the heels of what has been perhaps one of the most difficult times the city has gone through. And I will just say and preface that Gilman has an opportunity. And you could ignore what has happened, or you can engage what has happened. And I think if you choose to engage it, have your students really think about, talk about, try to make sense of, then you have the opportunity to raise a generation of leaders that will keep it from happening again. And that's coming from someone for whom it happened when she was here. I was here April 4th, 1968. I saw this city explode. And so to see almost 50 years later a second explosion really predicated on the fact that not much had happened to improve those communities in that 50-year period. As I said, you have an opportunity, and I hope you will engage kids, and particularly kids, when I think about my own students at Wisconsin, I often talk to them about the responsibility of privilege. You know, there's a biblical passage that says something like, to whom much is given, much is required. And so your students really do, they have the chance to take advantage of the finest education they can, but we want to see them do something that really speaks to changing the human condition. So that's kind of my prefatory statements. I titled this Going from Good to Great, and it probably is not the title I sent earlier, but that's how I do, because I never know. I tell you something so you'll leave me alone, and then I actually, when I sit down and decide what I'm going to say, then I really think about what's appropriate. But I'm calling this From Good to Great, Educating All Students. And I'm calling it From Good to Great because I have to make the presumption that you are already good. Because typically people who are not good don't give up their Thursday evenings, even if Scandal is finished. Trust me, because they don't care. So I have to believe that you will come out on a Thursday evening because you do care and because you are good. But good is never going to be enough to ensure that we do everything we need to do for our students. So I start with this little ditty. I don't know if you ever heard this. Good, better, best. Never let it rest till your good is better and your better is best. I literally hate that little poem because it's what my mother said to me all the time. So I finished junior high school, and that's what it was called back then. It's before somebody figured out that ninth graders were toxic, right? It's like, once you figured it out, we pushed them out and said, no, let's have middle schools. We don't need a ninth grade. And now I go to schools all the time where the high schools have figured out how toxic they are, and now they have these things called freshman centers. So they have them all in a building somewhere because everybody knows you really don't want those people around you very much.
Eighth graders are much worse.
Oh yes, no, they're like the worst, and I may get to that. They are, those are the people I started with. They're like the worst people on the face of the earth. But this particular phrase was something my mom always said, and at ninth grade, graduating from junior high school, I had all A's and 1 B. And guess what my mother saw? What happened here? So I was always in an environment where you were supposed to push towards greatness. And I think that's true for all of us. Even when we feel like we've done the best we can do with our students, we always have to ask ourselves, what happened here? You know, why is this student not making the mark? What more could I do? That's the very nature of our work. I want to start with sharing with you a trailer from the documentary Babies. How many of you have seen the film? Oh, perfect. Good. All right.
Ormada. Mau gede. Vomit. Enggak.
I hope that was enough to entice you to actually go rent it or see if you can. It's a marvelous film that follows these 4 families with these 4 babies who are exactly the same age for a year. But the reason I like to show that film is because we spent so much time lately talking about how different we are. And this film really underscores how similar we are as human beings. These families don't know each other. There's no connection across these spaces, these countries. But all 4 children are doing exactly the same thing. All of them. And the 2 things that all 4 are doing are the same things that all of the young people who cross your doorsteps do. Number 1, trying to figure out, how do I interact in this environment in which I find myself. There are goats that come in your bathwater here? Okay, well, that's something new, right? Oh, people walk around with stuff on their heads. I better learn how to put that stuff on my head here. So everybody's trying to figure out how to interact in the environment in which they find themselves. And second, they try to figure out, how do I interact with the other people in that environment? So in the first scene where the kid, they're fighting over that thing, it's like, oh, you going to try to take stuff from me? No, that's not going to happen. I'm going to retaliate. So nothing these kids are doing is different from what human beings around the world do. What's also important about what you're seeing is that you are seeing nothing that is considered a failure. Nothing. They're all attempting to crawl. They're all attempting to walk. They will all attempt to talk. And they'll all be successful. So one of the challenges I think we have dealing with kids at the school age is that school is typically the first place any of our kids encounter something we call failure. Before they start school, they've never failed. Never. Now, if you got a child and you watched a child learn to walk, that is a study in persistence. Nothing will stop that baby from trying to walk. They'll fall 1,000,000 times. I'm convinced that's why they make them diapers all big like that, because they go boom, but they never go, oh my God, I didn't pass this standard. I can't walk. No, they get up right away and try again, and try again, and try again. But school is this place where we say, you guys are passing, you guys are failing. And it is a strange phenomenon to think of human beings as, quote, failing, when what we're all trying to do is ensure success for them. So, the similarities, however, don't end at infancy. Because one of the things I know, and the data bear me out on this, is that poor families have similar aspirations for their children as wealthier families. You go over to Hopkins Hospital, and there's a Latino janitor whose wife has just had a baby. That janitor is looking through the little glass. Maybe they don't have them in the glass anymore because everything is so different. But that janitor is gazing at that baby saying, this one is going to college. This one is going to have a college education. This one is going to have a successful family life. This one is going to have career success. None of the data support the notion that that janitor looks and says, oh, this guy's going to be a janitor too. The aspirations are quite high for all of the kids in the beginning. But we have to ask ourselves, what happens? Well, one of the things that happens is that people have access to fewer resources. So if there is a CEO in that same maternity ward, the CEO will say, okay, I'm going to open up my 509 for this kid, and everything's going to be fine. Going to follow in the family footsteps. They're going to go to Gilman. They're going to leave Gilman. They're going to go to Harvard, because that's what we do. But the Latino janitor won't have an idea. Okay, I want him to go to college. I don't know how I'm going to get him there, because I don't have the same level of resources. I mean, there are literally some families in our society that the moment that that child is born, they're born rich. You are born into the Kennedy clan. You are a millionaire before you have your diaper changed for the first time. You haven't done anything but be born. So that's a different set of resources you have access to than lots of other people. There are also more daily challenges for some families. That there are health challenges. There's a challenge of just maintaining an income. Do I still have a job? You know, can I still provide day-to-day stuff? And there is the lack of wealth that exists. So a lot of times we do studies of kids, particularly diverse groups of kids, and we scratch our heads wondering, well, why is it that black middle-class kids aren't doing as well as white middle-class kids? Part of that has to do with the way in which we determine middle-classness. We use a very crude indicator. We use income. And income doesn't really tell the full story. So let us say that middle class would be, quote, earning $100,000. I think we would agree that's a middle class person and actually doing pretty well in society. But we have to ask the fundamental question, is that $100,000 one wage earner or two wage earners? See, if it's one wage earner, that means that there's another adult typically available full-time to the children and by association available full-time to the schools. Different from having two wage earners each making $50,000. It's still $100,000. But you got two people who are knocking themselves out to bring in that $50,000 who have no time to be devoted to just the kids and answering the call of the schools. But wealth is different. We talk about wealth, we are talking about the ability to transfer money intergenerationally. That's a very different set of circumstances. And we know that black and Latino net wealth is not very much. I live in what I would characterize as my last house. I'm not buying any more houses. This is it. It's taken me my entire career to get to this house. I designed the house, picked the builder. He told me, oh, you know, I'm not really competitive. We've been in this house now almost 20 years. He says, I'm not competitive below $300,000. I told him $300,000, not $300,005. Not a penny more. That's as far as I can go with this. So I'm very proud of this house. We worked hard to get it. But my neighborhood is filled with very young white families. And I'm pretty nosy. So I talk to people. And so when new folks moved to the neighborhood, I said, oh, welcome to the neighborhood. What made you decide to move here? Oh, well, you know, the houses are beautiful. You've got great schools over here. You got parks. The neighbors seem pretty friendly. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. Oh, so you must have done pretty well on the house you sold. No. This is our first house. Okay, at that moment, I do what my kids call the Scooby-Doo expression. What? Because this, as I told you, is my last house. This is their first house. So then I might say something like, oh, so you must have been saving forever, you know, so that you could get in this house. No. Our parents gave us the down payment. That's a transfer of wealth. I'm going to tell you right now, black people are not giving you no down payment. We just ain't doing that. We'll give you a toaster. We love a toaster. You get married, we'll give you a toaster. I have to laugh because one of my best friend's sons got married, and these kids are signed up on the registry at Williams-Sonoma. The only thing on the list I could buy was the toaster. The toaster was $100. I'm like, what does it do? I mean, I got a toaster from Target. It is $9.99. Got those big slices. I can do bagels. I can do Danish. I can do toast. $100. I want the toaster to come upstairs and get me in the morning. Okay, I'm gonna make you some toast. So I tease her. I tease my friend all the time. I said, look, if this thing don't work out with Jabari and this woman, I want that toaster back. You know? Fortunately, they are 3 kids in. He has a very successful medical practice. But the ability to transfer that money intergenerationally makes a huge difference in terms of what happens to kids and their ability to access or to reach those aspirations. And then, of course, we know kids have differential schooling. You know, if you say you go to school in Baltimore, you know you have to go another level down for people to really understand what it means. Because it's a very different thing to go to school at a place like Gilman versus going to school in Baltimore City Schools. So some of those schooling differences, of course, resources, what do they have at these places? The curriculum is different. The teacher knowledge is different. And even if you have brand new teachers here, you have brand new teachers surrounded by experienced teachers who can help. Whereas in many of the city schools across this nation, you have large numbers of novices with no help. And then we have in these schools often a concentration of poverty. So that's also something you will not be coping with in the same way. And the reason the concentration matters is because if you're in a school that is well-resourced and there's a couple of kids who are in poverty, there is a way for the school to compensate. So I think about schools I've been to that are well-resourced schools. They have a few kids who are in poverty. It's time for a big field trip or something, and those kids can't afford, but the parent-teacher association is like, oh, well, we have a fund for that. But if you have a concentration of poverty where there are lots of poor kids, you just can't afford it. And so those concentrations make the schooling experience quite different. I also want to talk about the difference that your difference makes. And this is from some work from a colleague at, I think he's at Bryn Mawr, David Canaan. Almost 30 years ago, David and I both were Spencer postdoctoral fellows, and he did a project called Who Gets In? Meritocracy and Politics in Harvard College Admission. So I want you to just look at this chart, for example. So look at the gender, look at the race, look at the grade point averages, look at the kind of school they attended, and look who got admitted. This is into Harvard College. What do you notice about who got in and who didn't get in? Not being rhetorical.
The black kid in public school, his family probably doesn't know anyone at Harvard.
Okay. So this is the one person that didn't get in. He is the same on every other dimension except this one. But look at this kid. He got in. So what do you think is the difference between this kid and this kid? Now one thing was, who knows who? We know, for example, that 40% of a Harvard freshman class is legacy. And 40% of those kids had a close family member who was a Harvard alum. That's true of most Ivy League schools. It's actually true of most elite schools. You know, a lot of times people at Wisconsin will say, well, that's not fair. They have all these legacy kids. I'm like, have you ever looked at how many legacy kids we have? We do have legacy. That's why we asked the question on the admissions form. Do you have a family member who attended the University of Wisconsin? That's just good business. You want alums to be happy. So that's one thing that may be the case as to why that kid doesn't get in. He may not know anybody and have that particular connection. What other reasons would you speculate?
When was this?
I just have a question about your sampling procedure. I mean, are you just taking 5 people at a 4.0 grade point average?
No, this is an aggregate, and I just made them into individuals. Okay. So this is not my work, this is David Caron's work. So David sat in admissions, and so basically what David found in looking across the classes is that if you were a black male with good grades and went to public school, you were unlikely to be admitted. However, if you were a black male with the same good grade profile and went to a private school, you were likely to get in.
So GPA also means college boards as well?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, what I'm saying is that their academic profiles are pretty similar, and they're, quote, all eligible to be admitted into Harvard. And in those kinds of cohorts, these are the kids who would get in, but one group of kids is less likely to get in.
And when was the same?
So he was looking in the 90s.
So this could be before Harvard was given aid to everybody, so it could depend on ability to pay.
Okay, so that could be a thing, about ability to pay.
Yeah.
Of course, the thing about giving the aid is that there's a correlation between academic credential and SES. So actually, that's not a big, it sounds like they're giving away a lot of money. They're not, because there's very few people who make less than $40,000 who end up with the academic credentials. Yes?
The public school system, the black student went to, wasn't as rigorous maybe as the public school system the Asian student went to.
Okay, so that could be, that could be a difference. It could be that he went to public school and he got a 4.0, but it wasn't as good as this public school. Yes?
Could there be some extracurricular activities such as a musical instrument mastered or?
So it could be some stuff that we're not showing here. Could be, this kid could be a great athlete, this kid could be a musician, okay?
It could also, I would imagine, the sort of the packaging of the application could matter in a public school that might have one college counselor for 100 kids.
Okay, so the support and assistance to pretty much
Through the
market
process,
yourself
yes.
through the process, okay? Any other reasons why we might speculate why this kid doesn't get in, but these kids do?
Along with that, sometimes if the candidate doesn't visit the school, doesn't meet the admissions rep, the family doesn't make that effort, that can tip the balance.
Okay, so the idea that you didn't actually show up there, you didn't meet
Demonstrate an
people,
interest, yeah.
you didn't demonstrate an interest. Any other reasons? Yes.
You're working 20 to 30 hours, and so the result is your extracurricular activities on your application is thinner.
Right, so you have good grades, but we don't see much beyond that with you. And so you've got other commitments, you work, you might have to take care of siblings, I mean, any number of things that take you away from stuff that we could record and put in your application could make you look like a different candidate.
This is kind of surprising. We had a speaker come in about this time last year that talked about getting into colleges, and he talked about how being Asian American now is disadvantageous. It like counts against you to be Asian American because there's so many really competitive Asian American students.
Mm-hmm.
And his presentation sort of made it seem like it would be much easier for the black male from public school to get into Harvard than the Asian American from public or private school if they had the same scores.
Right, so now we are talking about notions of overrepresentation among Asian American students. That's a debate that's happening at places like the University of California and a number of the Ivy League schools.
And class has been factored in here. In this listing here, everyone comes to roughly the same socioeconomic class?
That much I can't tell you that.
Okay.
Right.
Because that might be another factor.
But that, I think, is closer to what David Karen surmised from sitting through the process in the admissions office. And that was that even though this kid had good grades, there was a concern about fit. That somehow his counterpart at the private school may have learned the customs, the mores, the attitudes that would fit at Harvard, and the public school kid not. On the other hand, there was this perception that the Asian American student was not disadvantaged in that way. So it's a really interesting, notion of who we think belongs versus who doesn't belong. That there is an advantage, particularly for African American students, to private school attendance, because somehow it conveys something, maybe even if it's not so, that, oh, you went to Lawrence Academy. Oh, you went to Choate.
I would argue, again, with little empirical evidence, but I would argue that a kid from City College would have a much better chance of getting to Harvard than a kid from Gilman. All things being equal.
Okay.
I mean, today.
Okay, today.
We're not sending very. We're lucky to send one or two kids to Harvard.
Okay. Okay. But I thought it was an interesting finding in this particular study, because Karen himself worked the admissions office.
I mean, I think that the study would be more useful. I mean, easy for me to say, I'm not doing any work, but the study would be more useful to look across the board and say the Ivy Leagues, rather than just look at Harvard. Harvard's, I'll be honest with you, from my 35 years here, not as an admissions person, but just being as a lackey at the Gilman factory, my sense is that it's just a crapshoot. There's no rhyme or reason why one Gilman kid gets into Harvard and someone else, work kid, has to go to Yale or Dartmouth as a consolation prize.
So, just saying that, let me just throw something in here that I wasn't thinking of at the time I was putting this presentation together. If you had to guess which subgroup, racial ethnic subgroup in America, is the highest performing group, what group would you guess?
Highest as defined as
Academic performance. Asian Americans. That is the common belief. The truth is, the highest performing subgroup is Nigerians. They are blowing the top off. So the last 2 years we've seen these Nigerian boys get into every Ivy.
From Nigeria or Nigerian Americans? What?
From Nigerian Americans. Get into every single, two years in a row, that's been a big New York study. Oh, here's another, they say, quote, black kid. But if you just scratch a little further, it is a Nigerian kid who has gotten into all 11 Ivy League schools. So I think that's an interesting paradox, too, about who we think are, quote, the best performers. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, most Nigerians are coming from that upper strata of Nigeria. You remember an athlete named Akeem Olajuwon? He didn't play basketball till he got here. He didn't come here to play basketball. He came here to become a petroleum engineer because his parents are in the oil business. Nigeria is an oil exporter. They're part of OPEC. So it's interesting that there is that subgroup that we never kind of think about. And places like Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Princeton, while they tout the number of black students they have, it is not the number of African Americans that they have. The large percentage of these young people are African and Caribbean. Very few African Americans make up their black class. So Stanford talks about having the largest proportion of black students in its freshman class. But they're almost all of African, continental descent and Caribbean. Okay, so that was just kind of exercise. My work has been on this notion of culturally relevant pedagogy. What does it mean to teach in ways to ensure kids are successful? And sometimes people say, oh, you're talking about a way to educate African American students. Well, my work focused on African American students, and one of the things I tried to do was, quote, normalize them rather than make them objects of study. I made them the subjects of study. Some people say, oh, no, you're actually talking about a way to educate Latino students. Oh, no, you're actually talking about a way to educate immigrant students. But I would argue that I'm talking about a way to teach all students. A way to teach to ensure that all of our students are educated. That this notion of a culturally relevant approach doesn't leave anybody out. And so what I mean by culturally relevant, I hope this is an equilateral triangle, is we're talking about three things. a laser-like focus on academic achievement, or what I would call student learning. Reason I put that / student learning is because nowadays when you say academic achievement, people ask you what the test scores are. And that's not what I mean. You as educators know that kids learn a lot more than what we could ever test. So I'm talking about student learning broadly construed. Talking about something called cultural competence, and I'm talking about something that I call socio-political or critical consciousness. So let me just break down each of those briefly. For student learning, what I'm talking about is some demonstrable growth in the requisite subject areas. If you're teaching something, you have to be able to show people that a youngster came into my class able to do X, Y, or Z, and left my class knowing how to do X plus, Y plus, or Z plus. I think that's a simple request. That's the least we should be able to do. And say, this is where you started, and this is where you end up. This is what I know you now know or are able to do. When I talk about cultural competence, I'm talking about a firm grounding in your culture of origin while acquiring fluency in at least one more culture. So go back to the babies film. Those babies are learning what it means to be Namibian or Japanese or Mongolian or an American. But they also need to learn how to be more fluent in another cultural space. And that's not just for black kids or Latino kids. We do our white students a disservice when they leave high school monoculturally, because they will be entering the most cosmopolitan, globally connected community the world has ever seen. I have 3 sons and a daughter. My sons are the older. The daughter is the princess, who it turns out apparently has 4 fathers, her 3 brothers and her dad. But my youngest son is what school always called too social. And I bet if I talk to your students here and ask them to draw for me what I call a click map of your cafeteria or wherever kids hang out, they could do it for me. Most schools have these. That certain kids hang over here, and then a group of kids hang over there. And so I had to go to school to talk with my son's counselor about his too social behavior. Every report card I ever had for this kid said, well, he's a very bright boy, but he's just too social. He just talks too much. And I happened to go right after the student newspaper had published the click map. Some student drew the map and put it in the paper. Now this is a high school that 90% of the kids go directly to a 4-year college and 99% eventually. This is a high school on the edge of Stanford University. And I don't know if you've been following the stuff that's been happening in Palo Alto recently. Palo Alto only has 2 high schools. They've had 7 suicides this year. The stress and the pressure of being a teenager in Palo Alto is unbearable. My boys didn't let any of that bother them. So this one that's too social, when I go to meet with the counselor, and she's again telling me how social he is, I said, oh, I couldn't help but notice the click map that was in this week's student paper. Where would you place Kevin on the map? So she looked at the map and she said, well, I've seen him hanging with the jocks. I said, well, that kind of makes sense. He's on the football team. Well, I've seen him with the tech geeks. He loves technology. I've seen him with the theater kids. He has a very kind of artistic side to him. And she went group by group, In every group she could tell me that he'd been with that group at some time. She'd seen him with this group. She said, I hate to tell you this, but I've even seen him with the stoners. And I'm like, that'll be my kid. He wouldn't leave a group out. The funny part is that Kevin is now an adult. He is married. He's been working for some time. He went to college. But Kevin has a job in a Silicon Valley company in which his job is to communicate with upper management. He has to communicate between upper management and the people in those white Tyvek suits that actually make the chips. And he has, as a part of his portfolio, the responsibility for clients in Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan, Germany, and France. He gets along with everybody. He is his father's child. And indeed, when they had a turn down in the early 2000s and they tried to lay him off, it was the international clients who said, "Where's Kevin? Get Kevin back here. We don't have these problems when Kevin is here." And I remember saying to Kevin, Kevin, how are you able to do this? And he says, "Well, Mom, you got to pay attention to people." He said, "When I go to Germany, I'm telling you, Hans and Franz are not kidding. They want the work done." He said, "But when I go to Paris, Jacques and Pierre, they be like, 'Oh, Kevin, you work too hard. Let's have another glass of wine.'" He said, "I could go in there and say, 'No, we got to do it this way.' But I'd lose clients." He has learned a cultural competence that allows him to move comfortably in and out of different cultural spaces. And I'm afraid we don't do very much of that in the preparation of our kids. In fact, that very skill that the school thought was a bad thing is what has allowed him to have a very good living. So cultural competence is about making sure our kids leave not only sure of who they are, but have the ability to communicate successfully with other people. And then finally, this notion of the socio-political consciousness is about learning to use the school knowledge to solve relevant socio-cultural, civic, environmental, and political problems. So I started off talking to you about what has happened here a few weeks ago and about your engagement with that. Whether or not kids are, for example, learning to write editorial letters so that they can speak about that. Whether or not kids are able to read the data that suggests if you live in particular parts of this city, your likelihood of having a successful adult life is severely compromised. Looking at all of the skills and the knowledge that we offer them so that they can ask the quote, "So what?" questions. I mean, that's the question kids ask all the time. Why do we have to learn this? And I got it all the time because I was a history teacher. What is this any good for? But the ability to talk to kids about the fact that we're not just teaching you stuff so you can pass an AP test. We're not just teaching you stuff so you can get into the college of your choice. This is a democracy, folks. You got to make decisions. You have to understand what's happening in the world, and we have to prepare you so you can do those things. So it's those three things that make up this thing I've called culturally relevant. It's less about techniques, because often I get that, "Well, just tell me how to do it." No, it's a set of beliefs. It's less about prescriptions than it is about conceptions. How do you think about students as learners? How do you think about the nature of the knowledge that you are imparting? It's less about following a recipe than it is about understanding how to cook. Those of you who know how to cook know the recipe is just a bunch of suggestions to you. You look at it and go, "No, I'm not putting that in there because I can't stand that." But if you don't know how to cook, you're going to follow it line by line. One of my colleagues in math education many years ago was bragging on the fact that he insisted his mother made the best cornbread anybody this side of the Mississippi made. And he was going to get the recipe and make it for Thanksgiving. So we were excited when we got back after Thanksgiving and we said, "John, how did the cornbread come out?" He said, "Well, I got all the stuff she had on the list and I started assembling stuff, and then there was a line in the recipe that said, 'Stir till it looked right.'" That means nothing if you can't cook. But somebody who can cook will look in that bowl and say, that look right. So that's what I mean. We're not talking about giving folks a recipe to teach, but helping them become cooks. And some of the beliefs that we have about student learning is, first of all, you have to have this belief that the kids all have the capacity to learn. I get so frustrated when I work with teachers who tell me my kids can't. I don't know how you can say that when I can't even make that statement about my own children. My daughter, who could never figure out what she wanted to do with her life, but is perhaps the brightest of all of my kids, whenever she couldn't figure out a course to take at the University of Wisconsin, she took yet another math course, differential calculus. And so I said, well, do you want to be a math teacher? She said, no. I said, do you want to be a mathematician? No. I said, why do you take all these math courses? Because they're easy. Seriously? Yeah, like Mom, they have answers. It's not like sociology and anthropology and history. That stuff you study. There's no answer. I didn't know she had that capacity. So if I don't know that about my own kid, how can we know that about other people's kids? We have to know that all of our students deserve to know what achievement means in the classroom. When they come into your class, do they know what you're counting as achievement? Because a lot of times they don't know. Are you counting the neatness? Are you counting how often the stuff gets in on time? Are you counting what I have as opposed to what I know? What resources I have? This is reminiscent of the time my daughter, who was in a class in which they were doing incredible experimental, cutting-edge mathematics in 6th or 7th grade, I can't remember. So one of the tasks was to make a toothpick bridge out of 100 toothpicks, and the bridge had to be sturdy enough to hold your math textbook. I want to be mad at this project, but actually one of my colleagues wrote the curriculum. It's the math and context or something, right? Tom Romberg, my good buddy. And sure enough, my daughter came home with these 100 toothpicks to make the bridge. And all I could think of is, well, this is really not an equitable task. Number one, I got a box of 250 toothpicks, so I can make a prototype. That don't work. I can make another prototype. Maybe by the third time we'll get it right. But the truth of the matter is, toothpick bridges are not about toothpicks. They are about hot glue guns. Because if you ain't got a hot glue gun, you can't make it. It's not going to stay together with Elmer's. And yet there are kids in her class, as bright as she is, even brighter, who could not access the hot glue gun. So here is my daughter at home with 2 college-educated parents, one of whom is a university professor who has friends in the School of Engineering, in the Department of Civil Engineering. Who could say, what is this bridge supposed to look like? So indeed, we finally get the bridge made after the prototypes. And I say to her, okay, you need to go to bed. Your bus comes early in the morning. And my husband goes, bus? You're not taking my bridge on no school bus. So now we got another resource, right? A parent who has the ability to drive you to school so that your toothpick bridge doesn't get destroyed on the bus. When I got home that night, I said to my husband, how did it go? He said, oh man, some of them had them on boards and little trees, and then they had some little cars. We could have done that. And I'm sitting there going, what is the point of this exercise? Now basically, because I know the curriculum, the point is for kids to understand that triangles are reinforcing structures, because you've got to have a lot of triangles in this bridge for it to hold a book. But a lot of times we are judging kids on what they have. They have the ability to put it on a board, to make it fancy, to have their parents drive it in. You have to believe that successful teaching involves the knowledge of the content, the learner, and how to teach the content with the learner. How am I doing? I'm close to that time. I'm okay? Okay. This is literally Lee Shulman from Stanford's notion of that if you want to be a good teacher, first, we don't need to argue about that you need to know your content. I mean, that's just it. The kids everywhere, when they rank what they're looking for in a teacher, they want a teacher who knows his or her stuff. But you also have to know the learner. So this gets back to my 8th grade thing. Because I was certified in U.S. history, and my dream job was 11th grade U.S. history. I love 11th graders. In my mind, they are the best people on the face of the earth. Because they get it. I've already told you what I think about 9th graders, right? 10th grade in public school, 10th grade is the grade at which kids are most likely to drop out. Because they figure out this was much harder than I anticipated. That sophomore slump is real for them. 12th graders, well, you know, especially second semester 12th graders, that's literally a hologram. That's not a real person there. They have moved on. You know, and I remember dealing with 12th graders telling me, you know, you can't do nothing to me, my transcript is gone, and I got accepted, and I'm like, you're an idiot. They have telephones at that university. I could call them. I could tell them, you're not a very nice person. But 11th graders, oh man, they for some reason, they're like, this is real. I got to take the SAT, I got to take the ACT, I got to do this. I just love them. Unfortunately, everybody loves them. So because of my certification, the only other place that U.S. history was being taught in the school district of Philadelphia back then was in 8th grade. The worst people on the face of the earth. When I tell you, those of you who teach science, you understand this concept of metamorphosis. 8th graders are the larvae of the group. They're going to be butterflies. But that's not happening until 11th grade. You're going to still have them in that larvae stage. You're going to have Amazon women and midget men. She's going to stand in front of you with 2 pigtails, a face full of pimples, and a 38 double D bra. And you're going like, oh my God, what is this, right? And they're very sensitive. I didn't know any of this stuff because I was prepared to teach high school students. So I had to learn what it meant to be with 8th graders, early adolescents, for whom everything matters. And then you have to learn how to teach that content to the learners. Take an author like Mark Twain. Mark Twain is taught in middle school, Tom Sawyer, high school, Huckleberry Finn, college, short stories like The Jumping Frogs of Calaveras County, graduate school. You could be a Twain specialist in graduate school. But you cannot teach those middle school kids like you teach the kids in graduate school. It will not work. And so that's what successful teaching involves. And it's also that you know that all of our kids have to become critical learners. They can't just accept what we give them. They have to be able to ask the question, well, where's the evidence? Why is this so? And they also are teachers who understand that tests are but one measure of student learning. I'm not an anti-test person. I'm an anti the test as the only indicator. Because if we say tests are the indicator of whether or not people know something or are able to do something, then the best drivers in our society would be 16 years old. We all know that's not true. They've all passed the test. But oh my God, I would hate to live in a world where the only people on the road was 16. So we want to be sure that we think about tests in the right perspective. In terms of cultural competence, we have to recognize that all of us are cultural beings, not just people who look different from us. Each of us. I was sitting at dinner with somebody. Where's my Wisconsin guy? Yeah, well, there you go. And somebody said, oh, do you have good barbecue in Wisconsin? Are you serious? Does it have cheese on it? I mean, because that's what we have, cheese. And there is a whole upper Midwestern culture. We don't have water fountains, we have bubblers. You know, we have that culture, but we don't think of it as culture. As my students would say, oh, we're just regular. No, you're from the upper Midwest, and there's a particular way to be upper Midwestern. For example, in the upper Midwest, you don't talk about money. It's just too gauche. I remember asking one of my colleagues how much he made, and you would have thought I'd ask him whether he slept with his wife the night before. That's just something I would tell you. I said, we work at a state institution, fool. I can go on the computer and find out how much you make. I just want to save some steps. Why? Because I'm from the East Coast and I'm from Philly. And if I walked into a family member's house tonight, the first thing they'd say is, "Oh, that's nice. How much you pay for that?" And it wouldn't be considered rude. So that's a cultural difference. The culture influences every aspect of our being, including our learning. And it's the teacher's responsibility to learn about students' cultures and communities. It's important to use the kids' culture as a lever for learning. And in terms of that critical consciousness, teaching is a political act. And so you have to know the political context of your work. What's going on in the city, in the state? What are people saying about what's going on at your school versus some other schools? Our kids have to have opportunities to participate in learning experiences that connect them with the larger context. I was talking to your yearbook advisor at dinner also. And one of the assignments for my students in Philadelphia is they had to get a letter published in a newspaper. And they were like, "Oh, a letter, oh, that's nothing." Thinking, "Oh, I'll just write this letter, send it to the Inquirer." No, it's 1 million people sending letters to the Inquirer. I knew they wouldn't get their letters published right away. But what I also knew is that over time, they would have to keep writing letters and they'd get better at it. And then some of them got smart enough to figure out, well, we don't have to get it in the Inquirer. She said a newspaper. So they started doing community papers. Fine. I remember one semester about 8 kids had not gotten their letters published anywhere. What they decided to do is they made their own paper, which I thought was pretty cool, right? They had feature articles, they had sports things, and that there's really no success without student success. If your kids aren't successful, you're not successful. And the notion of the public is not a dirty word. Even though kids are here in a private school, they must engage with the public. They get to vote when they are 18. And so their votes will have implications for public life. I want to wrap up with an example of what I think is a really good example of a teacher that I'm talking about in this way, because I think sometimes it's better to actually see somebody doing this as opposed to just talking about it. And then I'll be done, and we can, if you have time for some questions, I'll be happy to take them.
My name is Darnell Fine. I teach history and language arts in Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta Neighborhood Charter is a coalition of essential schools with a philosophy of student-centered constructivist learning. And what that basically means is we anchor the curriculum in the lived experiences of the students. It operates under a series of common principles. And one of those common principles is less is more, depth over coverage, where we really go in depth with the curriculum and we really go in depth with teaching students how to critically think. You know, my critical education started with my mother, and it wasn't until high school when I moved here that I met a teacher named Miss Aliyah Aziz. Walk into her room, on the upper right-hand corner of her board, it says, Ms. Aziz be trippin', contraction untrippin'. Under that, it had Africa in big, bold letters, spelt with a K. And I was like, where am I? She was teaching me about sexism. She was teaching me about racism. She was teaching me about classism. And this was the first teacher ever that gave validity to my Black English vernacular. It's important for students to feel like the class is a democratic space where they can have dialogical encounters with each other. They have to be able to share who they are beyond the confines of the classroom. Kids before content. And what that means is like you have to look at individual kids before you look at these concepts and this content, because ultimately you're not trying to dump a whole bunch of facts into students and say, here, learn these. No, you have to get to know who they are first as individuals so we can really personalize the curriculum to fit their needs. And open forum is a way for students to express and bring whatever funds of knowledge that they have, whatever talents that they have, whatever's weighing on them heavily.
I had read one of my poems to my brother and my mom about love. It's not this.
Keep in mind that The canon in humanities is all socially constructed, where someone's picking these texts as being the texts that we study. Why can't students actually bring their own lived experiences in the classroom for us to study? Because that's just as valuable as Ernest Hemingway or William Faulkner or Toni Morrison.
Me and my brother Carson. It was the first time I got to see him again for months, and we took pictures.
And this is what my teaching philosophy is anchored in. It's anchored in question, question, question. Getting students to think through a series of Socratic questions so they can birth new thoughts and new understandings of the world. Socratic seminar is a way for students to have discussions. So there's an inner circle and there's an outer circle. The inner circle participates in a critical reading of a text. The outer circle is kind of like a panopticon. It's like surveillance, and they're like observing and they're checking behaviors. Then they're giving feedback to the discussion after the inner circle is finished. But then it's also reciprocal. This dialogical encounter I was talking about with open forum continues in a very academic way where the students are talking and I'm decentralized. They hate when I interrupt the Socratic seminar because it's their discussion, it's their space. Everyone has a chance to speak and it's supposed to be equitable. So it moves from this very individualistic type of activity to this very communal activity where it builds these interpersonal connections and interdependence, where it's about upholding and supporting the group. It teaches them to have these critical dialogues, not just in my class, but beyond the confines of my classroom. Every single student is a teacher to me, and they teach me something new every single day. They're critical readers, they're critical writers, they're critical researchers. They're amazing.
Darnell's ability to articulate what I'm doing, not to say, oh, I teach 7th grade and it's Western Hemisphere. I mean, anybody can tell you what the name of a course is, but for him to really talk about what he's trying to do and kind of engage philosophically about the kinds of knowledge and skills he's trying to build in the students made him just stand out among our selections that particular year. So I think I'm going to stop here. I feel like I'm running out of time, but I want to make sure I give you a few minutes to raise any questions that you may have had over anything I said. Yes.
There's a public school product who's lived the last 9 years with sort of a little bit of guilt somewhere for teaching at a private school. I think a lot about like what can we do to be a part of the solution in terms of the achievement gap in schools. And I think a lot more about that in the last 3 weeks because of what happened in Baltimore. And often when I talk, and I ask a lot of people this question. And they say, well, what you're doing is you're preparing these people who are going to be the leaders in the society, and they can make it better when they're in charge. And I'm not discounting that, because there's some truth to that. But like, what can we do now, right now, as an institution and with our students that's not, we hope 15 years from now, 20 years from now, they do the right thing. That like right now we're being part of making school better for everyone, not just our really, really lucky kids.
Right. So one of the things I have a very strong belief in is developing partnerships with different kinds of schools. It's the old pen pal thing, right? Where instead of getting somebody across the country, what about somebody across town? Maybe if you have another colleague who is a teacher in a public school setting, in a grade equivalent to what you are teaching, that your classrooms can take up issues and write back and forth. And now because of electronic communication, they don't even have to wait about mailing letters off and things like that. But that becomes your, quote, buddy school to raise some of these questions. It will be important for your kids to see the condition under which some kids go to school. It will be important for the kids in some of those schools to see what other things are available. I had a kid do some pen pal. I've always worked in urban schools, and so I looked for a colleague who worked in a rural school, and they became pen pals. And it was amazing just the conversation, just the early getting to know each other conversations about, you know, I've got a dog or I've got 2 cats versus, oh no, I've got like 4 cows and I've got some dogs. What? What are you doing with that? You know. But just getting the kids to, because I think they'll find a way. You end up being the facilitator to make them cross those divides that they normally would not. And maybe you help them with, you and maybe your peer in the other school come up with the prompt. What are some things we should be talking about? So, and they can do that right now. Yes?
It's interesting, the comment that Chris made, because I agree with him about the urban schools, and I started in the public schools and then came here, and I do have, on occasions, I have some guilt. But I also know and feel that our kids here at school come to us with quadruple some things going on in their mind, and things that happen at home, and things that happen in their community, whether they're white, black, green, whatever their ethnicity, they still come with some heavy baggage too. And we have to help them manifest and navigate that particular area. And what made me think of that even more so, a few colleagues and I were getting ready to do a trip in a few days, and we went to a public school, and we sat and spoke with the teacher who made this comment to us in our debriefing, and she said, you know, I was sitting with a fourth grader, and we were going through some reading exercises, and we were reading Dr. Seuss. And in the conversation, the young girl said to her, as she was reading Dr. Seuss, she said, you know, last night, I think I saw my daddy for the last time this morning. And she said, why? She said, well, he came home and he said he had done something to someone, and my mommy said he's probably going to go away for a long time. And I probably saw him for the last time. And this child is trying to navigate all of that through her mind as she's reading Dr. Seuss. And the teacher is saying to herself, what did you just say? And the young woman repeated that. So this teacher now has to step back, understand that she's reading Dr. Seuss, and the young girl is reading Dr. Seuss to her so she can understand it, but she has to now think about it as a teacher, what do I do with all of this information? You know, so it's interesting to see where we sit here in our school as opposed to that public school teacher who's sitting in her school. And do we deal with some of those same issues? I would say yes, but maybe not as graphic, but yes. So what question am I asking? I don't know.
But I think what you're evoking for me are some of the fact that sometimes we think those complexities are further away from us than they are. And I'll give you the example. Madison is, quote, this little idyllic town in Wisconsin, state capital, major university town. Some people refer to us as a party school, but we do some serious work up there too. You know, if it's not the football, it's the Final Four. I mean, all that is surrounding Madison. It's a, quote, good place to live. We always end up on the top of these lists of best places to live. But on March 6th, we had a young man shot in the streets by a police officer who was unarmed. And everything came off of that. Now, did we have rioting? No. But we have had marching, and we have had protests, and 2 weeks ago the district attorney filed no charges. And our kids are like this. And I've been trying to work with teachers to say, what are you going to do to help your kids try to make sense of this? We have kids who don't, quote, feel safe. They feel vulnerable in ways. We have other kids for whom they've been quite privileged. They're the children of professionals, but they're like, how could that be in Madison? And so even though we sometimes think, you know, oh, that's Ferguson, that's New York, that's Baltimore. Now they're saying, no, it's America, and we're not immune, and we've got to engage them around these, because they're in their minds. They're walking around with this stuff. And often what I think we're seeing, particularly in our high schools, is that we're seeing increased instances of kids getting in trouble and in fights, and I'm telling teachers all the time, it's not about that fight. It's about what kids are carrying with them, and so somebody bumping into them is just triggering a whole lot of other stuff they're carrying with them, and we have to be able to have serious conversations about their lives. This is the first generation that we know probably won't do as well as their parents. This is the first generation that has doubts about America's prominence. Wasn't true for me. I came up in a generation where we knew America was always going to be number one. At least that's what we thought about it. This generation is looking at China rising. It's looking at inability to get jobs, coming out of college saddled with debt. I mean, all of that wasn't the truth for me. So yeah, it is complex, even in the most privileged spaces. Probably can take one more question. Someone have one?
I've worked in middle school. They're still trying to kind of figure out their own cultural identity. So what are some ways that we can sort of help students experience other cultures in a comfortable way, because they don't really seem to want to jump in sometimes to that?
Middle school kids are pretty egocentric. And so I think the place you start is them really talking about their lives. So, you know, the history teacher in me will show up. One of the toughest concepts for kids to get their heads around is time and chronology. It's easy for us because we've lived longer, but kids don't get it. I mean, you say something about something happening in the War of 1812, and it's like, oh, was you living then? But it's just hard to grasp. So one of the ways that I try to help kids understand time and chronology is to do their own personal timelines. And what we do with those personal timelines is, you know, like kids will say to me, well, I don't remember the first time we moved from such and such place, or I don't remember the first vacation we took. And I tell them, look, make it up. Who will know? We weren't there. And then when you go home, you can check and make sure and you can adjust it. But what we've learned to do out of those timelines is from time to time have kids take items off and write the full story. Okay, so the story, so I've heard stories about the first move. On the timeline, it looks innocuous. We moved from here to here. But once the whole story is written, and all the things that happened, and the reason that we moved, what was happening in the family, so getting them to engage in their own lives, rather than this big thing we're calling culture, because no kid is the culture bearer. And a lot of times kids don't want you to point them out as the person in that culture. You know, it's too big a burden. But as we begin to have them explore their own life histories, then you as the educator can begin to pull in some of the cultural references that make sense in those life histories. So I want to ask you guys a question before too late, and that is, what do you believe you do well at Gilman?
Could you repeat that?
What do you believe you do well at Gilman?
What?
Mr. Smythe, turn around, don't look at the people.
We know our boys well.
You know them
We
well.
do a good job of knowing each individual.
Okay, so you know the individuals well. Okay. Anything else you think you do well? Yes.
We provide a lot of opportunities for them to try different things. Lots of clubs, lots of musical groups, lots of athletic options, lots of, broken up schedule with recess time to move around. We have an advisory system that seems to work pretty well so that
Good.
kids aren't falling through the cracks.
All right, and that sounds like it links up with the notion of knowing them well, right? And what I like about that, and I'm very clear, I think language matters. I never call what you've described extracurricular. It's not extra. It's co-curricular.
Okay.
It's right along with the curriculum. Certain things are not extra. At the University of Wisconsin, let me tell you, the band is not extra. Our band got suspended, couldn't play at a home game. We lost our home game. We never lose home games. But we ain't had that band because the band is right along with it. And so the idea of the co-curricular that you really do well, I think, is important. Yes?
I think that we do a nice job of taking care of each other. I think that the teachers take care of boys, and then the boys see teachers taking care of each other.
Okay. So you model what you want to see in them. Great. Yes.
I think we create an environment for them where they celebrate excellence in a lot of different areas when they see it in their friends and in their peers.
Great.
I agree with Jeff, and maybe put it a slightly different way. I think the school does a good job of affirming kids who are comfortable with who they are, no matter who they are is.
Right. And
I think those guys do well here. I think kids who struggle here, particularly socially, are those who are not quite as comfortable with who they are.
Okay.
Again, no matter who that is and where they're coming from.
But it sounds like you provide that sense of belonging. That was one of the things that I can't get over at Wisconsin. We have 40,000 students, and people feel like they are Badgers. And we literally do so much stuff up front to teach them all the songs and all the cheers. And I mean, it's like you're a Badger when you leave. And I remember when I first moved there, my mother called me from Philadelphia, nice little old lady. First question out of her mouth was, well, have you met Mildred Ricks' son? I'm like, Mother, there's 40,000 students here. I wouldn't know Mildred Ricks' son from a hole in the wall. She said, well, I bet there ain't no 40,000 black hockey players. I said, oh, yeah, I know who he is. That would be Chris. I don't know. But somehow that kid found a way to belong, and it sounds like you do a good job of helping kids try to find a place to belong. Anything else you think you do really well? Let me just switch real quickly. What could you be better at?
Teaching our boys to be more culturally aware.
Okay.
Forcing them to be uncomfortable in social situations.
Sometimes you can't just make everybody feel good. Sometimes you got to push them a little bit. Yes.
Teaching your boys to be comfortable with failing.
The gift of failing, right? Because most of us learned our best lessons at stuff we weren't successful at. I love Michael Jordan's statement. He says something about you can count up how many points I got, how many rebounds, but what you don't know is how many missed shots. And it's all those missed shots that made me a better player. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, forcing our teachers to be uncomfortable.
Could do a better job of helping the teachers be a little uncomfortable. Okay.
Or at least, let me say, being honest about their discomfort.
Okay.
And then doing something.
Okay, great. Anything else you think you could be better at? So I think you got a bit of an agenda. You know what you do well, but you also know the things that you could be better at. Remember, we started this out by talking about going from good to great. And so those things you could be better at are the things that will make you a great school. Thank you for giving up your Thursday and engaging with me tonight. Appreciate it.